And good morning to everyone. We have a guest speaker that Heather's going to introduce, and we'll let that occur, and then we'll come back and cover contract items and any tech tips that Heather wants to throw in today. But why don't you proceed, Heather?
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy today we have with us a really great financial advisor. She will be covering what's happening currently in the financial markets and some insight and tips for you about things that you could be doing to have a good financial future. So I'm happy to introduce Marla Vickrey with Hofer and Associates.
Thanks, Heather. Yes, I'll probably just start with a few kind of just key financial things. I'll try to keep it basic. So I hope I'm not boring anybody, but hopefully it'll give people a good overview or things to think about maybe that they weren't thinking about. My name is Marla Vickrey, and I'm with Hofer and Associates Wealth Management, and we're registered independent advisors, and we're fiduciaries. So we try to do what's best for our clients and meet their individual needs. Usually, and Heather heard me say this yesterday, we were in a networking meeting. I start out with people when they're asking about what they should do with their money or how they should invest. My first question is usually, what's the purpose of the money? And there's a few, sometimes people know what the purpose is. A lot of times they'll say just general things like, oh, it's for retirement, or, oh, I'm saving it for the future. And so then I start from that, and then we can go to setting goals to really kind of fine tune on what that purpose is for why we're investing it and how we want to invest it. And everybody's a little different on those goals, but typically we start with talking about short-term goals. So that's usually 1 to 3 years. And for short-term goals, a good rule of thumb is talking about, a lot of times people don't even have anything as simple as a budget. Some people like to call it a spending plan because a budget sounds too limiting, but a spending plan, or just kind of where's your money going at the end of each month. And some people have that really dialed in. Other people, it's nice once in a while just to look at. And now everything's online, so it's so easy. You can just go online and look at where your money's going each month to the bank. Sometimes that's depressing, sometimes it's not. And then another short-term goal would be an emergency savings. If people don't have an emergency savings, they really need to set one up. And a question I get a lot is, well, should I start saving for emergencies, or should I start paying down my debt? And my answer is always yes, both of it. You should be trying to do both at once, just because it's very important to get an emergency savings set up, but you should definitely also be looking at your debt and trying to pay that down if that's possible. And so those would be short-term goals. Midterm goals is going to be saving for bigger things, especially for things that would apply to most of you, I'm guessing, would be when people are looking at the biggest purchase is usually a house or a boat or a vacation. Those are going to be, hopefully you're planning a little bit ahead, a few years ahead, and those are the other goals that we look at, and usually those are midterm goals. And then finally, the long-term goals, typically, depending on what age you are, the long-term goals are going to be retirement. Even if you're near retirement age, you got to look at it long-term. Life expectancy is getting longer and longer. And so we usually try to plan out to 90, 95 for people, just to make sure that they don't short themselves on retirement and end up having to go back to work in their 80s because they lived longer than they expected. Key dates to think about when you're thinking about goals. The first one is 59 and a half. That is the magic age. That's one of the few ages that we're happy to get older, besides when we're younger and turn 16 or 21. 59 and a half is when you can take money out of your retirement accounts without incurring a penalty. There are other rules for taking money out early, but typically if you're going to retire, 59 and a half is the magic age. The next magic age is 62. That's early Social Security. If you're paying into Social Security and want to collect, 62 is the earliest you can do it, other than some other special circumstances for widows or widowers. They can sometimes collect at 60. 65 is the next magic age. That is Medicare. And people usually are happy when they qualify for Medicare because it's a lot cheaper for health insurance. 66 to 67 is full Social Security. That's when you can start collecting without worrying about earning too much. And then you can also delay it till 70. And I get a question from people a lot as to whether or not they should collect early or collect late. And we can talk about that if anybody has questions about that. But it's usually an individual basis. We can crunch numbers and decide what's best for that person. And there's different options if people are married or have partners that they can share collecting. The next magic age is 72. There's something happens called required minimum distributions. At 72, those 401ks, if you have them, or deferred retirement plans, the government says you've received tax benefit enough, and they make you start taking out some of that money at 72, and so they can start collecting some taxes on it, and it's a percentage based on your age. The next key thing for long-term planning is we call it the first death. If somebody has a spouse or is married and one of those partners dies, something can happen called the survivor gap. And the survivor gap is when a partner dies and you were collecting 2 Social Security checks, one of those goes away, you get the higher of the 2 amounts. And also a lot of times your taxes go up because you go from the higher filing of joint income to single income. So it's kind of a double whammy. So sometimes not as much anymore. People have pensions, that'll get reduced or go away. So we just like to make sure that that survivor gap is covered if somebody loses a spouse. And then the last is legacy. That's long-term planning. Also, that's when you pass away, just leaving the money to your heirs. The best way to do that, making sure that you've planned that through, thought about it, and leave it in a way that is not going to give them a tax burden, or if you have charitable giving in mind, setting that up so that it goes to where you want it to go. Those are kind of the timeline things and the key ages. Should I ask questions now or should I keep going? Does anybody have questions on those?
I think it's great if people have questions just as we go.
Okay.
Let's see. Can look in. Doesn't look like anybody. Does anyone have a question on those pieces? Every situation's so different that
Yeah.
it's like particular questions are the best usually. Okay, head on.
Yeah, actually, I do have a question.
Okay.
Okay.
So I was curious about what percentage of your income should you put towards the emergency fund?
Especially for self-employed individuals or people who are paid on 1099s or their income isn't steady. Like my husband has a job where we know what he's getting paid every single month.
Mhm.
I have a job where it can fluctuate, and probably a lot of you have jobs where it can fluctuate. So I usually say larger amounts. 3 to 6 months is the of expenses is typically the emergency savings recommendation for people who are self-employed or their income is fluctuates. I always say go on the longer end, do 6
Okay.
months, even to a year. Just a year I know is a lot to get saved up, but especially if your income is up and down all the time, I definitely say, and for emergency savings for the shorter term, and I'll get into that with diversification, that's the money that you want to keep safe. I love investing, but there is money that although now we're starting to get some interest rates, even though it's not earning much, you don't want to put that at risk. That's the money you want available if something were to happen or your income wasn't what it was expected. So probably for most real estate agents or people in that field or self-employed, I would say at least 6 months of expenses.
Okay, minimum 6 months, preferably up to 12.
If people have a steady income, then you can get away with 3, but yeah. And then also it's a personal choice. I have some people, if their bank account gets below a certain amount, they get really nervous. It's usually round numbers. It's like, I got to have at least 20,000 or 10,000 in there, or I get nervous. I mean, some people, they just like, our brains are wired to like round numbers. So there's just certain amounts. It's personal for everybody too, but rule of thumb is 3 to 6 months.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So with the goals, the other thing you want to think about, you hear diversification a lot, and that's where it comes into the emergency saving. Those short-term goals, that's the money that you want to have in the safer accounts. Something CDs are starting to raise, you get rates. I've been recommending, and I can't do individual recommendations for any of you unless I meet with you and know what your needs are, but I have been telling people a lot about I-bonds right now. They're government-backed security, they're government-backed bonds. Some people used to call them war bonds back in the day when they'd issue bonds. You can do up to 10,000. They're paying right now 9.62% interest because it's based on the inflation rate. You have to leave the money in there for at least a year. And so if you know you're not going to touch it for a year, it's a good place to probably better interest than I've seen in 15, 20 years. And the timeline for them is 5 years. If you take it out before 5 years, you might lose 3 months interest, but it's still a really good deal as long as you know, okay, I'm not going to touch that money for a year, because you will get the interest. You can't take it out for a year, but 9.62 is for a very safe investment is very good. So if anybody's interested in those, they can just check out treasury.gov. Make sure it's .gov. It's the government website and not some other person trying to cheat you into it, but it's definitely a good place for safe money right now. So timeline, the other thing to diversify that people don't think about is tax diversification. So there's different accounts that offer different tax benefits. Tax Now is gonna be the things in your savings where we'll probably start getting them again, where you used to get the 1099 interest form every year when we actually earned interest on it, and then you pay as you go. So if you have money in the savings account and you earn a little interest, that's kind of the Tax Now. Tax Later is your retirement accounts that are tax deferred. So those are very beneficial to you if you're in a higher income tax bracket, or if you're a tax person, if you're filing your taxes and they say, hey, you're going to owe money, you might as well throw some of this into a retirement account, because then you're paying yourself. You might get a write-off on it. Then it'll lower the amount you owe. Then that way you're paying yourself instead of paying the IRS the money. So it's definitely a good thing to do if you have the money to lower your tax burden. And so that's going to be your Tax Later bucket. And that's where I said the age 72 comes into play, though, because in retirement, when you take that money, it shows as income. Now, hopefully, well, maybe not, but hopefully in retirement, your income might be a little lower, so your tax burden might be lower. So it'll make sense to put it in the tax deferred and do it later. But the best one, the one that we all love and the tax people love, is your Tax Never accounts. And that's going to be Roth Iras. Some people, there's limits on Roth Iras, though. Some people earn too much money. So a Roth IRA is, I put the money in, I don't get to write it off on my taxes. So in other words, if I earn $1,000 and I put it in an IRA, I get to say, oh, I get a little bit of a discount. I get to take that off my income towards my income taxes. If I put it in a Roth IRA, I don't get to do that. But the benefit is it grows tax-free. So if I put $1,000 in a Roth IRA and it grows to $2,000, I don't owe taxes on that gain. That's the benefit of a Roth IRA. So when you retire, if you take money out of an IRA, say you take $2,000 out of an IRA or 401k or any other tax deferred, it's going to show as income and you might owe taxes on it. If you take that 2,000 out of, if you put 2,000 in a Roth IRA, you never owe tax on it. You know, you have 2,000 in there. When you take it out, the government's not going to show that as income on your taxes. So sometimes it doesn't make sense to put it, sometimes it makes more sense to write it off on your taxes now, but sometimes also it makes sense. There's something called a conversion. If you have money in a tax deferred account, you can convert it to the tax-free. Just be aware that for that year, it's going to show up as income for that year. But, and that's other planning you can do. A lot of times you work with tax professionals, the person's tax person, and we figure, okay, how much can we convert over to a Roth IRA as income for this year so that we can get it over that tax wall for later. And some people it doesn't make sense because they don't have a long enough time horizon, but definitely if you can get stuff into that tax never bucket, your tax person's going to love you in retirement. There's also some life insurance and some other things that gets a little more complicated. I won't get into it now, but that can be considered in the tax never bucket. There are some life insurance where you can put the money in and take just the principal out and leave the gain, and you won't be taxed on it. Or when you pass away, that legacy planning, it goes to your heirs tax-free also. The other part of risk tolerance then is going to be your actual risk tolerance. So that's going to be, are you conservative? Are you up at night worrying about the market? I do have some clients, especially the past few weeks, that have been calling me that are losing a little sleep based on the market. And I just have to remind them, we have a financial plan, we have a time horizon, we can ride this out. Sometimes if it's more conservative or if they're going to need that money sooner, then we got to make sure it's definitely in places where it's not going to bounce around as much. If you're a moderate investor, then you're able to handle some of the ups and downs. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. If you're aggressive, those are the people that they're going to be more upset if they're missing out on the gains when the market's up than and they're not worrying at night if the market's down, because they can ride it out and wait. And sometimes it's just really based on your time horizon. As far as, like I said, if you're not retiring for 10 or 15 years, no problem. If you're planning on retiring, doesn't mean that everything has to be in safe stuff. Say you're retiring next year, but that's where we look at that 1 to 3 years. We try to make sure that that's safe for your income in retirement, so we're not having to sell things while it's low. And then we also want things invested. If you're in your 70s and we think you're going to live to 90, if you're just in safe stuff, you're probably not going to keep up with inflation. So it's good to have some of those, maybe after 5 years of income or whatever, in the safer stuff. It's good to have some of it invested. But once again, it depends on the person, because some people are very risk adverse and some people are just like, yeah, I don't worry about it. I know I've been through it. I know that it's going to go up and down and I'd rather get the gain. So there's no right or wrong way. It's just a personal thing. And then we just have to look at your time horizon. And the other thing for diversification is there's a lot of different kinds of funds out there. We try to have a mixture of everything. The past few years, when the market's been doing really well, other than this year, we've had people say, why do you even have me in some of these bonds? They've done terrible for the past few years. And part of that is the offset is like a teeter totter, right? If the stock market's going down, a lot of times your bonds are going up. We've seen that this past few months. When the treasury rates are raising, that's when we see a lot of downturn in the market. So we just tell them, well, that's for the times when the market's going down, it's going to offset. So it's good to have diversified in different things, different stocks, different bonds. Little bit of world exposure out there, although that can be a little bit of the market update stuff. I'm a little worried about some of the stuff going on in the world. So I'm pulling back a little bit. It's still good to be invested. You look at emerging markets, in the world, I mean, that's where there's been a lot of growth. It's just when it's down, it swings a lot. We have quizzes for risk tolerance. So if people aren't sure really where they fall into that bucket, there's always quizzes you can take. In fact, we kind of, when we're meeting with people and going over what's appropriate for them, we have them take a quiz just to make sure that what they're telling us is really in line with what we think that they're telling us. And I found a lot of times if there's couples, one might be very risk averse and one might be very risk acceptable. And so sometimes I always say, well, then it just makes you moderate because then you got one of each. And it's not uncommon for couples to be on different sliding scales when it comes to the risk. And then sometimes when I'm sitting here meeting with people and we talk about goals, the partner's surprised they didn't realize about a goal, or we're talking about retirement. If you have one saying, oh yeah, I'm planning on getting a motorhome and driving around the country, and the other one's like, we never talked about this. So it's always good to have those conversations. It's also good to have a plan. That's the other thing about the plan, especially like I said, I've talked to a couple this week of people where it's just reminding them we have a plan. This is why we set some of this in place. Yeah, the market's fluctuating right now, but we have confidence in the plan you have. And so it's good to have a good plan and have confidence in it. Then your emotions don't rule what you're invested in. A lot of times a part of my job is just talking people off that ledge. They just want to hear me say, yeah, we went through this in 2000, whatever. And remember, this is what happened back then. You were worried then too. And then remember this happened, or we give them some of the facts and figures that may not be getting conveyed on the news, or a lot of times the news likes to give doom and gloom because that sells better, or they may not give more in-depth stories. So it's good to just talk to people and say, okay, don't let your emotions rule, because the whole thing is buy low, sell high. I mean, that's the the old adage of the market, but our instinct is when it's low to panic and sell. So it's just sometimes just reminding people, remember, we got to use our head and not our hearts. We don't want to sell while it's low. We actually want to buy while it's low. And that brings me into some of the market stuff that's going on. So I have some neat figures on bull and bear markets. So a bull market, when you hear, sorry if this is too simple for people, but a bull market, when you hear it on the news, is when the market's up over 20% of the low. So a bull market typically is when the market's going up. For the past decade or two, we've had really good bull markets. A bear market, which is what would be considered couple times this year, they keep saying we're in bull market, we're in bear market territory, and that's when the market's down the 20% off those highs. And so the statistics are, if you look at it, I have a chart that goes back 96 years and averages out the bulls and the bear markets. And I just find it fascinating that we always remember the terrible times, the 2008, 2009s, but the average bear market lasts 11.3 months. So it's usually less than a year that those markets are down like that, where you feel scared and unsure. The bear markets last, typically the average is 4.4 years average. And then when you look at the returns during those times, the returns are the average cumulative return for a bear market is negative 31%. And that's including the Great Depression, the Great Recession we had in 2008 to 2009, adding in all those. And then if you look at bull markets, the up markets, the average cumulative return is 155%. So if you look at overall, that's why when you see the charts, you see a lot of dips in there, but overall it's climbing. For the 96 years, let me look, because I can never remember these numbers. For the 96 years that they went back to, 71 of those years were positive years with an average return of 21%. 25 of those years, so about a quarter of the years, were down years, and the average negative return was 13%. So once again, I mean, we can never say, the old disclaimer is the past performance doesn't guarantee future results, but you can kind of look and make educated guesses on, typically the markets do recover. I have a lot of people asking me about this time with everything that's going on. Is it going to be like 2008, 2009? What was interesting about those, and my answer is I don't think so. What was different about those was it was deep and it was quick and everything went down, and there was a banking crisis, and you guys would know it was a whole mortgage crisis back then. What was interesting though is that was actually very short, and the recovery afterwards, it just zoomed right up, and we had years of just the market's just doing phenomenal. I mean, they were just doubling, and it was just crazy. I don't think this time's going to be down the 40% that a lot of people were, or some even were down 60%. I think we're going to kind of see what we're seeing now. I can't say we're at the lows. I think we've been playing around kind of with the same bottom in the market for a while. It might go a little lower, but I'm thinking we're probably kind of near the bottom. Nobody knows for sure. But I think it's going to take a lot longer. I don't think we're going to see that big zip up that we saw before. I keep telling people, I think this fourth quarter, we're going to see some recovery. As far as we've got elections coming up, we've got, and I'm not being partisan either way, but the markets like it when there's checks and balances. So anytime you get a different party in, not to say anything politically, just from a market standpoint, the markets like it, the stock market likes it, because they don't care which party's in charge as long as there's two parties in charge, because then they can't push any big bills through. And the thing that markets don't like is uncertainty. So if they're certain nothing big is going to come through, they typically like that, or at least they can plan ahead for that. So I'm thinking after the elections, if we see some just shifts in power where we have some checks and balances, that'll probably be good for the markets. Also, we've seen a lot of spending over the summer, and typically the spending is a quarter behind. So a lot of people took vacations, money that they'd been saving for after COVID. They saved and splurged this summer. So we think some of those companies are going to show those profits in the fourth quarter. And we think that's probably going to drive things up too. Of course, it always just depends on what's happening in the world. There's a lot of banking things worldwide. I'm not worried about American banks. We put a lot, hopefully, we put a lot of systems and checks and balances, and I think they learned their lessons from the 2008, 2009 crisis. So I'm not as worried. I mean, things do drag us down. That happens in the world. The war in Ukraine is a big thing, but we're not as tied to Europe as we are to the Asian markets. So what's happening in Europe is going to affect us, especially if we get involved in any wars. But as far as the economies go, it's probably not as big of an impact versus if something were to happen with China or Taiwan. But even then, we're seeing companies are starting to move out of China. Apple just announced that they're the first time ever for their new phone production. I think they went to India or one of those. I was just hearing that they're starting to move out of China, I think, which makes me happy in the sense that, because I am worried about future problems with China. So it makes me happy that they're hopefully starting to plan ahead a little bit, because I think if tensions raise there, that's where you'll really see the impact in the US markets. Trying to think of what else.
That's lots of great information, Marla.
Yeah, sorry, did I talk too long?
Oh no, you're good. You're good. Does anybody have any specific questions, or if you have want a little wrap up, little last bits that would be good for us, that would be great.
Sure. Okay.
I don't see any questions.
I have a question, Marla. The state has a new retirement plan, which is employees. I don't think it's not available to independent contractors, which our agents are, but employees either automatically subscribe to or opt out of. Do you have any thoughts about that plan?
I think anybody that's, and I have had people call me and ask me that had the option or that are talking about it. I think anything that gets people to save is good. If I think doing it on your own is, well, it just depends. Doing it on your own is probably better unless your employer, if that's the only way you can get retirement. The benefit of employee sponsored plans like 401ks or 403bs, the benefit of those is a lot of times the company will match your contributions. And so that's free money. So if I'm putting in 3% of my income and my company's matching 3%, that's free money. So those I'm really big on. The other ones, the government one, if that's all they're going to do, I think that's great. If personally, I like more control. So if they're not doing anything individually where they have control, and once again, that goes back to the Roth Iras and the benefits of some of those. I always like control where I can control it and what I'm invested in and how it's invested versus kind of the cookie cutter things. So for me, I would think, oh, I'd rather be doing my own plans, but if that's going to get them to save, I think it's great.
Thanks.
Great, great. I saw Alejandro, you had your hand up? Did you have a question?
I think he was applauding.
Actually, I was clapping.
Oh,
But thank you for the information. It's a lot. I need to watch the video later on.
Okay.
oh yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing, there are, and I can send this to Heather if she wants to send this out. I have kind of
That'd
a
be
thing
great.
of key financial figures just for personal figures. It has tax things and earnings limits and things for Roth IRAs and IRAs. I always say if you're eligible to contribute to a Roth IRA and you're not really doing anything else, at least do a Roth IRA because it's so, you can use it for so many things besides the tax benefit of being tax-free later. You can use it towards first-time home purchase. You can take money out without that 59.5% tax penalty for the gain. You can also use it for college planning for kids. A lot of people come to me and say, I want to do college savings. And the first thing I ask them if they're eligible, if I know their income, are you doing a Roth IRA? Because it does not, a lot of times for your FAFSA, that's the financial student aid, you don't have to put your retirement accounts on there. It doesn't count against you. So then the kids, if they qualify for aid, if it's in a college savings, they look at that. They're not going to look at it if it's in a retirement account, and you can use that towards their college. And then if they don't need it, then it's retirement for you. So.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah. There's some good things with the Roth IRA. I would say probably now we're in a really sweet spot, I think. Once again, I don't know if interest rates are going to keep going up. The feeling is they might go up maybe another time or two, maybe probably one more time, and then things will start to contract and it'll go down again next year, perhaps. Once again, I don't know. It's kind of like the market; it might still go down, but the interest rates might go up. But for the first time in a long time, it's nice because I'm able to look at interest rates and fixed account options for some of my clients and actually get something. And then also the stock market's down. I feel like for a long time, it was very highly priced. It was almost overpriced. And now I think it's much more reasonable. So I feel like it's kind of a good time. We've got high interest rates and low stocks. So it's kind of a sweet spot for us. Like I said, if they have that time horizon, because there are some things that I'm concerned about, the inflation and the job market. I think it's going to take a while to climb out of it. But if you've got some time horizon, I think it's a really good time with the interest rates and the stock market prices.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Marla. If you want to send me that, I can send it out. And if anybody, maybe put your contact info in the chat. So if anybody has any other questions, they can reach out. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Marla.
Uh-huh.
Okay, contract wise this week, I've got 3 or 4 things. Let's start with question came up about assignment. Okay. Oh, I have a blue screen. There we are. So our agent got a representing buyer, got them in escrow, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and the escrow was accepted, the contract was accepted, the escrow was open. And Mr. and Ms. Smith called our agent, said, oh, we want to put it in our family trust. So the question is whether some documentation needs to be done at the contract level by us around that page. Okay.
I had my legs like this.
Oh, sorry. Didn't realize it wasn't.
Okay, Heather, we got stuff going on there. Paragraph 23 deals with assignment. It says buyer shall have the right to assign all the buyer's interest in this agreement to buyer's own trust or to any wholly owned entity of buyer that is in existence at the time of such assignment. And then it goes on and talks about the prohibition of the assignment in other cases and the seller's requirement, the seller to ask for the requirement for the buyer to ask for the seller's approval. So the contract itself says that the buyer can assign this to their own trust or LLC or some entity that they own that exists prior to the assignment. So I don't think we need to create an assignment document saying the buyer hereby assigns to the buyer's trust because it's right here in the contract. We'll see if the title company, the escrow company agrees with that, and we'll just proceed on the basis that and use the name of the buyer's trust, excuse me, in the conveyance documents. And worst case scenario, the title company wants us to create an assignment. We do an assignment. Another question came up under notice to perform. The notice to perform is a kind of a essential ingredient or a tool, but it also is kind of a heavy-handed tool. We generally like to work in cooperation between agents and between the buyer and the seller to resolve any timing differences, get extensions where they're logical and needed. Because dropping a notice to perform on someone is it's kind of like say, hey, you fool, get your act together. And we can do it a little more diplomatically, I think, in most cases. I've known agents, and some of you probably have, that just love to pass around notices to perform. It just kind of gives them a sense of power or something, I don't know. But here's the paragraph 14E on notices to perform. The notice to perform or notice to seller to perform shall, 1, be in writing, 2, be signed by the applicable buyer or seller, 3, give the party at least 2 days after delivery, 48 hours, we always say. A notice to perform or to the seller to perform may not be delivered any earlier than 2 days prior to the scheduled performance date. So the question came up this week was, we're in escrow, we're representing a seller, the buyer had a loan contingency, and it actually was due to expire. This question came up on Wednesday or Tuesday. It's due to expire on Friday. Okay, so the question comes up on Tuesday and said, well, should I give them a notice to perform on Wednesday so that they know they're under the gun to get their contingency removed by Friday? And I said, I don't recommend that. It kind of is just I would recommend it. Why don't you call the other, the buyer's agent, make sure they're aware of it and find out what the status is, rather than just send them a notice to perform, which is kind of cold and hard-hearted, I like to say. So, any question on either of those two things that are in the RPA?
Gary, I just have a few people have asked me what happens once you've given a notice to perform and they don't perform, what are the options at that point?
Yeah, let's go back to the contract and see what it says. So it all has to do with the party's right to cancel, either the buyer's right to cancel or the seller's right to cancel. So 14C deals with the seller's right to cancel, 14B deals with the buyer's right to cancel. Let's just deal with the seller because they're two different things. But so if the buyer doesn't deal with their contract obligations, then and it mentions all these contract obligations, paragraph 3D, 3C, 5C4, 6B, 11F. These are all buyer contract obligations. If they don't perform on a buyer contract obligation, then the the seller may cancel the agreement. After delivering, the paragraph starts out with, after first delivering the buyer notice to perform, seller may cancel this agreement if by the time specified, and so forth. And there's also buyer contingencies. If the buyer hasn't removed their contingencies, that's up here, C1. Again, it says the seller may cancel. So those are the seller's options. Do they have to cancel? No, but they have the right to cancel. So say they give the 2 days notice and you and the other parties are negotiating furiously to get either the contingency removed or the contract obligation done. You can continue that negotiation until the seller's ready to pull the plug, and then they have the right to cancel, as long as they had given the 2 days notice earlier. I mean, they could do it 4 days after they give that notice, or 5 days. That doesn't matter so much. So that's really their only option.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Couple other things. We had we have a property listed that's a duplex, and we got an offer on it written on a residential income property purchase agreement, a RIPA. And the RIPA here, loading, is very similar to the RPA, excepting it has a few more clauses dealing with the fact that it's a rental property. And I generally believe that for properties, units that are 1 to 4, single family 1 to 4, you would use the RPA. This is a duplex, actually a duplex with another income unit, so it's 3 units. And I talked to the other broker, and they prefer to use the RIPA. And I don't have any problem using the RIPA. It has some additional clauses because in this case, that buyer is also going to be an investor, not occupy the property. So the income property contract deals more with investment properties from both the buyer and seller side. So certainly consider that if you're writing an offer on a duplex or a triplex. If you have any questions, let me know. The practice tip for last week was on handling seller financing. And this has kind of morphed over the years. It used to be fairly common for us to see some seller financing in a transaction. And we, as agents, would prepare, as the buyer's agent, would prepare the seller financing addendum and, help prepare, the agents would help prepare notes and things like that. Well, the current in the current world, the practice tips provided by our broker risk management firm are as follows. For both agents, agents shall refrain from completing the seller financing disclosure. So they want us to give the seller financing disclosure to the seller, for the seller to take to their attorney and for them to fill it out. Now that's a long order. And the seller might say, well, what am I paying you for? But that's kind of the counsel that we're getting. So that's step number one. If you get resistance on that, call me and we'll figure it out. It says agents should recommend that the counsel prepare a promissory note deed of trust. In my practice over the years, I have no problem putting together a promissory note. I've probably done hundreds of them. The title company always prepares deed of trust, in my experience, because they got to record it. They have to have a recordable form. Our practice tip here says that legal counsel should do it. So again, if the seller's going to have to employ legal counsel, they're going to say, well, I don't want to have that extra expense. Why aren't you doing it? So again, if you get pushback on that, just let us know. And of course, agents should always advise their clients to consult a qualified California real estate attorney, QRCA. Remember that acronym. The seller's agent should immediately recommend the seller consult with a qualified California real estate attorney if a buyer brings in an offer with seller financing. Should encourage the client to obtain an opinion letter from a qualified California legal real estate attorney about the risks of seller financing. If the property is 1 to 4, single family 1 to 4, the law requires that this SFA be done, the seller financing addendum, and they're saying that should be done by the seller and the seller's counsel, not by us. So that's a bit different than we've had in practice over the years. Under buyer's agent's tips, it says buyer agents should refrain from handling the seller financing disclosure to avoid being the arranger of credit. There is that term in the SFA that the arranger of credit is the one who prepares that SFA. And are we qualified to be arrangers of credit? I guess is the real question. So that's a little bit of a change, a little more harder line. I may ask Bill to address that in the legal update. By the way, the legal update is set for November 6th, I believe. So mark that on your calendar. Sorry, November 4th. Friday, November 4th, 9:30 a.m. to 11. And put that down, and it will be a Zoom meeting, so please attend. And the last thing we had this week, we were dealing with a buyer wanted to go in, and in the term of the agent uses, they want a lease to buy. And I said, well, what's that mean, lease to buy? Well, essentially, they want to lease the property with an option. So if that
Right after I'm done.
proceeds that way, we've got 3 documents to do. We've got a lease, we've got an option agreement, and we have a purchase agreement. So if you get into a lease with option to purchase, they're complicated forms. Please review them with me or your manager or Randy, anyone. Just get a second set of eyeballs on it, okay? So that's all I've got. I see Marla has put her contact information in the chat. If you want to make a note there. And anyone else have any other questions before we call it a day? What did you have lined up for next week, Heather?
Next week I am going, you're here, right? Doing
Yeah.
contracts, and then I'm gonna cover the digital ink program in zip forms. So you can send your, signing packages right from there and it'll come right back into your transaction. Monday, I'm starting the foundations class, which will be in Santa Rosa on Tuesdays. It'll also be live streamed. So that's a great to just get all your foundational skills. And then I did put in the chat as well, or let me know if you don't get it. Marla sent over really great information of lots of details all about like the different limits to be able to get a Roth and to get, when you can take Social Security, it's all in there and it's a great reference sheet. So that's a link for that's in there, or just email it me if you want me to email it to you.
Great, thank you.
Wow.
I thought you were going on a field trip next week, no?
Nope, that's the 20. Oh, you are right. Sorry, I am going on a field trip next week, so I won't be here next week.
Okay.
So next week, oh, I have to double check because I have Madrona, but I think I'm not looking at I'm confused because I do have, but I think it's the following week that Madrona is set up to do Farming 101. She is from First American Title and she's going to cover farming, but I think that's the 31st. I may have spoken correctly to you, Gary.
Okay, all right, good deal. All right then. If no other questions, have a great week ahead, and we'll see you next week with or without Heather. We aren't sure.
If I won't be here, I'll have another little guest speaker that can come and highlight something.
Okay, great.
All right.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.